So with what you know right now, I'll admit all of my kids followed the vaccine schedule. I didn't awaken to
Mine did
this
too, right.
until later. And
Yeah.
I know you mentioned
Yeah.
that well. Let's say you had young kids right now. How would you approach it?
Good question. I've been thinking about that because things have changed. You know, we have teenagers, things have changed. I think that kind of my rule of thumb is it's been found, Christine Stabell-Ben, who's a Danish researcher, believes that there are nonspecific indirect effects of vaccines, which I would think makes sense. They may have good effects and bad effects, right? Like you've alluded to with all of the autoimmune conditions and things going on. So live vaccines, if they have nonspecific helpful effects, then that might be something to consider, like the MMR vaccine. Measles is also a pretty nasty disease. So I might start there. I might see if I could get comfortable with the MMR vaccine. Maybe I would split it up. You know, maybe I wouldn't do all three. So that one is made by Merck. So me being a prior Merck employee and really believing that the company is a good company, coming 20 years later saying that is a pretty interesting example of the mindset shift that is necessary to contemplate what really does make sense for our kids. Because I wouldn't have said that 20 years ago. I was bought into, you know, this is a great company. This is, you know, tons of research went into this. The vaccine pipeline is not very profitable. You know, the pill architecture for pharmaceutical companies, it's much better because you have pill, you know, the rest of your life.
But could they be related?
I do think they're related. I do think that there's more to this than I was aware of 20 years ago. And I do think that that I would probably start there and just see what I felt comfortable with there. And then from there forward, just look at the risk of the hepatitis B is one I would probably not do at birth these days. But like I said, I get questions all the time, and I just don't feel like like you said, I feel like I don't really know. I would, if I were a parent, I would think about, can we start here? I would think about trying to avoid a C-section, if at all possible. We are really doing quite a few of those, and they're elective. The microbiome of the child is influenced by delivery method. And so if the child is coming out of the mother's vagina, they're introduced to that microbiome influence, whereas if they are being surgically removed, they're exposed to hospital microbiome initially. And that is, the research says, that is an influence on downstream, you know, autoimmune effects. So I would start there. I'd also think about breastfeeding. I would do everything it took to make that happen. And I had a lot of difficulties, a lot. But I knew that that was the best possible thing for my son. I didn't even get a epidural with my first son, who was 9 pounds, 8 ounces, and I'm not a big person. So I was really trying my best as a parent to really set him up for, you know, the most natural, you know, entry into the world that I could. I don't know the science on epidurals or not. The first one almost broke me. I did get an epidural for the second one, who was over 10 pounds. So I would really, if I were a millennial parent, I would really think about my own health and preconception health before I even really got too overly concerned about the vaccines, because you can do a lot to set up the health of your child. Preconception. I actually helped author or edit a book on that, preconception health. So Amy Ogle and Lisa Mazzullo wrote a 500-page book on this very topic, you know, 20 years ago. And it might be worth revisiting, you know, some of those things that may seem like ancient times now, but I think really provide a parent with a much broader view than just vaccine or not. It's actually so much more than that.
Yeah, it brings up greater philosophical questions about interfering with nature.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we have this assumption that we've made these major advances medically that have enhanced our health. And in some respects, I mean, if we have a nuanced discussion, we're really good at prolonging life. We're really good at emergency medicine. I think there are times that there are certain pharmaceuticals, which are chemical compounds made in a factory, which can extend life, can decrease suffering. So I don't want to deny all that. But when it comes from a public health perspective, our individual well-being, from mental health to physical health, I think there's no debate that is deteriorating dramatically and has so at a rapid pace over the last 30, 40, 50 years. So the question is, and I think this is a greater question about health, is what are the unseen, unforeseen consequences of interfering with something so natural that has evolved over potentially millions of years.
I completely agree with you. I am coming to that conclusion too. I don't know if that, I think you've talked about the fear culture a lot, and I think the pandemic really, really hurt young people as far as, trust in resiliency and trust in even something beyond themselves. Fear culture really affected the high schoolers. I was invited to my son's high school to speak about public health to a group of young health, careers, individuals think about health careers. And we were masked at the time. And I remember talking to them about epidemiology and teaching them a little bit about mucosal immunity. And after the presentation, they actually came up to talk to me like they were, risking missing the bus home to come talk to me afterwards. And I will never forget their eyes, peering out over their masks, brimmed with tears of hope because they had heard a message of hope about their body's own resiliency. And that image has stuck with me because I really think for, young kids, very young kids, think about parents protecting toddlers in that very formative time of their life. Think about parents having young kids during the pandemic, not touching things, stay inside, don't get too close. Imagine what that does to a young person growing up in that environment. Think about high schoolers, masked up, not confident in their body's ability to handle a virus. And then you think about, generations of kids, if we think about each age group that went through that 4 years of panic and distrust of their own bodies. I really think that it has set us up for a major overhaul in our psyche because fear is driving everything. And that sets up stress, all kinds of downstream systemic inflammation. Like everyone's on a total cortisol, not everyone, there are a lot of people who aren't, but a substantial proportion of the population that was affected by public health messaging is now in a state of persistent, near panic. And that's just not a healthy way to live. So how are we going to unwind that? I think we have a lot of work to do to unwind that, especially if those kids who are paying attention, doing well in school, following the rules, you've talked about this, tend to also be the ones going into academia, tend to be the ones going into public policy decision making. We've got an army of people who are fear-driven versus making decisions out of values and conscious choice.